Alaska begins with a feeling before it becomes a place. A feeling of distance, of silence, of a land so vast that it seems to exist on a different scale from the rest of the modern world. Here, mountains rise out of cloud and ice. Rivers cross great empty spaces. Storms move over landscapes so wide that human presence can almost disappear inside them. Before Alaska is understood, it is felt. To look at Alaska on a map is to see a state. To stand before it is to understand something larger. This is not simply another corner of America. It is a frontier of land, cold, and distance, a place where geography still shapes life with unusual force. Its coastlines stretch into fog and open sea. Its interior unfolds in mountains, forests, rivers, and frozen ground. Even now, Alaska resists simplification. There are places in the world where human design dominates the landscape. Alaska is not one of them. Here, the land still appears immense enough to ignore us. Roads are rare against this scale. Settlements feel temporary against the age of the terrain. Even the idea of control begins to feel fragile when set against the size of what surrounds it. In Alaska, scale is not background. Scale is the first fact of existence. Ice has shaped much of this world. It carved valleys, pressed against mountains, and left behind a landscape marked by force and time. Across Alaska, the visual language of the land is written in stone, snow, and frozen water. Nothing feels ornamental here. The terrain carries the weight of deep winters, ancient pressure, and seasons that can still turn beauty into danger without warning. The mountains do more than define the horizon. They define proportion itself. Against them, forests become patterns. Rivers become threads. Human structures, when they appear at all, seem brief and vulnerable. This is one of the central truths of Alaska. It constantly reduces us to our true scale, not by violence alone, but by sheer physical magnitude. And then there is the emptiness. Not emptiness as absence, but emptiness as presence. A sense that space itself is one of Alaska's defining forces. In many places, the eye expects interruption. Roads, towers, cities, noise. Here, it often finds distance instead. Distance in the land, distance in the weather, distance in the time it takes for one world to reach another. That scale is not only visual, it is practical. In Alaska, distance changes what movement means. Weather can redraw the limits of a day. Cold can turn routine into risk. A journey that looks simple on a map may, in reality, pass through terrain where isolation is never far away. This is a place where nature is not simply admired, it must be reckoned with. And yet people have always come here. Not because Alaska is easy, but because it offers something the modern world rarely does. The feeling that land still matters more than convenience. Life here is shaped by scale in immediate ways, by weather, by remoteness, by the long reach of winter, and by the simple fact that the surrounding world is still larger than the systems built inside it. This is why Alaska feels different. Not only because it is beautiful, and not only because it is harsh, but because it preserves a relationship that much of the modern world has forgotten. Here, people still live in negotiation with the landscape. The land has not disappeared beneath infrastructure. The seasons have not been pushed to the margins. Nature remains central, visible, and powerful. To understand Alaska, we have to begin with this scale, this overwhelming physical presence that shapes everything that follows. Because in a land this vast, wilderness is not scenery. It is the force that governs life. And nowhere is that more visible than in the ice, the mountains, and the unforgiving ground itself. If Alaska first reveals itself through scale, it is understood more deeply through substance, through ice, through stone, through cold that does not simply cover the land, but defines it. Here, the ground feels less like a surface and more like a record of pressure, time, and exposure. Everything in this landscape suggests endurance. Across Alaska, ice is not an exception in the landscape. It is one of the forces that built it. Glaciers have carved valleys, shaped coastlines, and left behind a world that still carries the imprint of ancient movement. Even where the ice is still, it never feels passive. It feels heavy, alive, patient, Stone gives the land its skeleton. Ice gives it motion. Together, they create an environment that feels older than the human idea of borders, roads, or settlement. In Alaska, mountains do not decorate the horizon. They impose themselves on it. Elevation changes more than the view. It changes weather, visibility, danger, and time itself. A mountain range can divide one world from another, turning a short distance into a serious barrier. What appears majestic from afar can become punishing at close range. In this terrain, beauty and hostility often share the same image. Cold in Alaska is not merely a season. It is a governing condition. It shapes movement, silence, architecture, labor, and risk. It slows the body, sharpens consequences, and turns exposure into something immediate. The cold here is not symbolic. It is physical authority. Even the ground can feel uncertain. What seems fixed may be seasonal. What appears solid may be temporary. In much of the modern world, the land beneath us is assumed to be stable, ordinary, dependable. But in Alaska, the earth itself can remind us that permanence is often an illusion. This is a place where climate is written directly into the terrain. Water is everywhere in this story. Locked in ice, rushing through rivers, falling from mountains, shaping pathways through wilderness. It connects the frozen and the living parts of Alaska. It also reveals that this landscape is never truly still. Even in silence, it is always being remade. At the edges of the land, Alaska becomes even more exposed. Mountain, ice, and ocean meet without softness. The coast is not a gentle border. It is another zone of pressure, weather, and force. Here, the frontier is not only inland, it continues all the way to the sea. What makes Alaska extraordinary is not that it contains mountains, glaciers, or storms. It is that these elements still dominate the terms of reality. They shape where life gathers, where travel is possible, where danger begins, and where human certainty ends. This is not scenery arranged around civilization. It is a world that still exists largely on its own terms. And yet this harshness does not produce emptiness alone. It produces life that has adapted to cold, distance, scarcity, and sudden abundance. In Alaska, the land may seem unforgiving, but it is never lifeless. Its ice, rivers, forests, and coastlines sustain one of the most dramatic natural systems in North America. To understand that system, we have to follow the creatures that move through it. Beneath Alaska's silence, there is constant struggle. Beneath its stillness, there is motion. And in a land shaped by ice and stone, survival belongs to those that can answer its demands. For all its silence, Alaska is never still. Beneath the ice, above the tree line, along the rivers, and across the coast, life is always moving. It hunts, migrates, feeds, hides, waits, and endures. In this vast northern world, survival is not a moment of victory. It is a constant negotiation with season, distance, and hunger. Much of Alaska's wilderness is organized around movement, and few movements matter more than the return of salmon. From the ocean back into inland rivers, they carry energy deep into the landscape, feeding systems far beyond the water itself. What looks like a migration is, in truth, the beginning of a chain of feeding, struggle, and renewal that reaches across the entire frontier. Where salmon gather, predators follow. And few animals are more closely tied to the image of Alaska than the bear. It is powerful, solitary, and deeply adapted to the abundance and violence of this place. Yet even here, strength alone is not enough. Timing matters, season matters, fat reserves matter. Every opportunity has its window. Not all survival in Alaska comes through aggression. Some of it comes through patience, bulk, and the ability to endure long seasons of scarcity. The moose moves through a different rhythm of the wilderness, less sudden, but no less demanding. Its size offers power, but it also requires constant energy in a land where winter can stretch across much of the year. In Alaska, even giants live under pressure. Elsewhere in the wilderness, survival depends on cooperation. The wolf belongs not to abundance, but to pursuit, to patience, coordination, and the discipline of the pack. In a landscape this large, prey can vanish into distance, weather can erase advantage, and failure carries real cost. Predators here do not rule easily. They survive by reading a world that is always shifting beneath them. Above the rivers and coastlines, another kind of hunter watches from air and height. The eagle's world is built on vision, timing, and sudden precision. In Alaska, even the sky feels tied to the same law that governs the ground below. Conserve energy, wait for the right moment, and act without hesitation. No part of this ecosystem is separate from the struggle to endure. Each life is linked to another. The wilderness of Alaska does not end at the tree line or the mountain pass. It extends into cold seas, where life follows currents, tides, and migrations no less dramatic than those inland. Along the coast, the frontier becomes marine immense, unstable, and rich with movement. What happens on land is part of a larger system, a system in which river, forest, shoreline, and ocean remain inseparable. To understand wildlife in Alaska, it is not enough to know the animals. You have to know the calendar written into their bodies. Everything is seasonal here. Feeding, breeding, migration, shelter, risk. The year does not pass gently through this land. It resets the terms of life again and again. There is a tendency to romanticize wilderness from a distance, to see freedom where, in reality, there is constant exposure. In Alaska, life is magnificent, but it is never soft. To be born here is to enter a world of competition, cold, uncertainty, and relentless calculation. Beauty exists everywhere in this landscape, but it does not cancel hardship. It reveals it. And yet survival is not only a story of predation. It is also a story of care, instinct, memory, and learning. In every generation, the wilderness has to be understood again. Routes must be followed. Threats must be recognized. Timing must be learned. Life continues here because knowledge, too, is part of adaptation. Seen together, these lives form more than a collection of animals. They form a system of exchanges shaped by terrain, water, weather, and season. Nothing in Alaska's wilderness exists alone for long. Abundance in one place creates struggle in another. Movement in one species transforms the fate of many others. For countless generations, this living system has shaped not only the animals of Alaska, but the people who have entered it as well. Because to live here is to live near these same forces: migration, scarcity, weather, distance, and seasonal opportunity. The wilderness is not separate from human life in Alaska. It surrounds it, supports it, and at times threatens it. And nowhere is that relationship clearer than in the communities built at the edge of this immense land. In Alaska, survival belongs not only to the wild, it belongs to anyone willing to live within its terms. For many people, Alaska exists as an image of wilderness. But it is also a place of daily life, a place where people wake to darkness, cold, distance, and the practical demands of living far from the conveniences most of the modern world takes for granted. Here, survival is not only a matter of instinct, it is also a matter of routine. To live in Alaska is to live with scale in intimate ways. Communities may be separated by mountains, sea, weather, or simple remoteness. A town that appears small on a map can feel profoundly far away in practice. Distance affects everything here: supplies, travel, work, emergencies, and the rhythm of ordinary decisions. Isolation is not an idea in Alaska. It is part of the architecture of life. In much of the world, roads define movement. In Alaska, movement often belongs to the sky. Bush planes serve as lifelines across the frontier, carrying food, tools, medicine, mail, and people between places that are too distant, too rugged, or too isolated for ordinary access. Flight here is not luxury. It is infrastructure shaped by wilderness. For many communities, the land alone is not enough to explain life in Alaska. The sea matters just as much. Fishing has long been one of the clearest examples of how people adapt to this environment, reading tides, weather, season, and migration with the same attention the wilderness demands of every living thing. Work here is often physical, uncertain, and deeply tied to timing. Opportunity arrives in windows, and those windows do not stay open for long. In Alaska, preparation is a form of survival. Cold magnifies mistakes. Distance punishes assumptions. A missed delivery, a broken engine, a sudden storm, or a failure to prepare can have consequences that reach far beyond inconvenience. This is why ordinary life here often demands an unusual level of foresight. To live at the edge is to think ahead. Even the simplest tasks can expand under Alaskan conditions. Travel takes longer. Weather changes plans. Weight matters. Fuel matters. Daylight matters. What would be routine elsewhere becomes logistical here. The frontier survives not only in dramatic moments, but in the quiet arithmetic of daily effort. Every journey asks the same question: are you prepared for what this land may demand? Then there is the darkness. In Alaska, winter is not only cold, it is long. Light can become scarce, and with it comes a different kind of pressure: psychological, physical, and social. The landscape withdraws into shadow, and daily life narrows around endurance, discipline, and the ability to continue through months that test patience as much as strength. Survival here is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is simply sustained. What allows life to continue in conditions like these is not toughness alone. It is knowledge. Knowledge of weather, of routes, of season, of tools, of timing, of what can be trusted and what cannot. In Alaska, experience is often the difference between confidence and vulnerability. The land rewards respect more than bravado. But life at the edge is not defined only by hardship. It is also defined by community. In places where conditions are severe and distance is real, people depend on one another in direct and visible ways. Isolation may shape the setting, but connection is often what makes endurance possible. Here, survival is shared. Still, no amount of experience removes uncertainty entirely. Weather can close routes, ice can delay movement, distance can turn small problems into larger ones. In Alaska, control is always partial. Human systems exist here, but they remain exposed to older forces: wind, cold, terrain, season, and the long reach of geography. This is what makes the modern world feel unusually fragile in this place. That fragility does not mean people do not belong here. It means belonging takes a different form. To live in Alaska is not to erase the wilderness around you, but to coexist with it, to build within its limits, to work within its seasons, and to accept that the landscape will always remain part of the equation. The frontier is not outside the community. It begins at its edge and continues through it. And because of that, life here always contains a measure of risk. Not constant catastrophe, but constant exposure. Exposure to cold, to remoteness, to mechanical failure, to shifting conditions that can narrow options quickly. In Alaska, danger is rarely abstract. It is woven into distance, weather, and the simple fact of being far from immediate help. And yet, this is also why Alaska exerts such power over the imagination. Because here, life can still feel direct. The land is not hidden behind systems. The seasons are not softened into the background. People remain close to the terms of existence: work, weather, distance, food, shelter, light, and time. Much of what is fundamental remains visible, but life at the edge is becoming more complicated. A place already defined by cold, distance, and exposure now faces additional uncertainty. Conditions shift. Seasons become less predictable. The balance between endurance and instability grows more delicate. To understand Alaska fully, it is no longer enough to see how people live here. We also have to ask what happens when the frontier itself begins to change. In Alaska, people have learned to live within the power of the land. But even here, that power is not standing still. In Alaska, danger rarely arrives as spectacle. More often, it arrives as exposure. as cold that penetrates faster than expected, as weather that closes distance around you, as silence, emptiness, and the realization that help may be far away. This is the reality beneath the beauty of the frontier. In a land this large, vulnerability is never far from view. Weather in Alaska is not just a condition to be endured. It is a force that can rewrite the day without warning. A route can disappear into snow. A familiar landscape can become unreadable. What was manageable one hour can become dangerous the next. Here, uncertainty is built into the atmosphere itself. Cold adds another layer of pressure. It slows machines, drains strength, narrows options, and punishes delay. In many places, temperature is background. In Alaska, it can become the difference between routine and emergency. The body feels it, tools feel it, time itself feels altered by it. Nothing about extreme cold is abstract when you have to move through it. The danger here is not contained in one element alone. It exists in combinations. Terrain, weather, isolation, darkness, and cold overlap until risk becomes cumulative. A storm on open water is one kind of threat. A frozen pass in low visibility is another. A mechanical failure in the wrong place can become something else entirely. Isolation is what gives all these dangers their full weight. In Alaska, remoteness is not merely scenic. It changes the meaning of every problem. Distance slows response. Weather narrows options. The margin for error becomes smaller when the world around you is measured in hours, not minutes. This is a landscape where being alone can become part of the threat itself. Then there is darkness, not simply the absence of light, but the expansion of uncertainty. In long winter stretches, night reshapes perception. Distances feel greater. Movement slows. Fatigue deepens. Even familiar places can seem less knowable when the land disappears into shadow for weeks at a time. This is why preparation matters so much here. Not because risk can be eliminated, but because it must be anticipated. In Alaska, experience often means learning how quickly conditions can change, how small failures can cascade, and how important it is to respect limits before they are crossed. The frontier does not reward overconfidence. It rewards humility. But Alaska's dangers are not only immediate. Some unfold slowly, across seasons and years. Ice shifts, ground softens, coastlines erode. Patterns once relied upon become less predictable. In a place already defined by exposure, change adds a new layer of uncertainty, one that is harder to see in a single moment, but impossible to ignore over time. What makes this especially significant is that Alaska has always depended on patterns. Seasonal patterns, travel patterns, freeze and thaw, migration and access. When those patterns begin to move, communities, ecosystems, and decisions move with them. The frontier remains powerful, but the terms of that power may no longer be as stable as they once seemed. That instability reaches across everything we have seen. The land, the animals, the roots people depend on, the margin between adaptation and exposure. In Alaska, danger is never only about one storm or one season. It is about living inside a system where force, distance, and change are always in conversation. And this is what gives Alaska its particular gravity. It is one of the few places in modern America where the limits of human control remain unmistakably visible. Not because people are absent, and not because life here is impossible, but because the surrounding world still retains the power to interrupt, humble, and redefine human plans. Alaska does not allow the illusion that civilization stands apart from nature. It keeps the relationship exposed. Yet Alaska is not important only because it is dangerous. It matters because it reveals something increasingly rare, a place where the modern world remains visibly incomplete, a place where wild systems still shape human life in direct and undeniable ways, a place that reminds us that scale, weather, darkness, and distance still mean something. To stand before Alaska is to confront both beauty and limit. And perhaps that is why this frontier still matters. Not because it belongs to the past, but because it continues to show us how small we really are. After the storm, Alaska returns to silence. But it is not the silence of emptiness. It is the silence of scale, of distance, of a landscape that remains larger than the systems built within it. And perhaps that is where the meaning of this place begins. Not in its danger alone, but in the way it makes human life appear once again proportionate to the world around it. In much of the modern world, nature has been pushed to the margins. It is managed, measured, redirected, and often hidden beneath layers of infrastructure. But Alaska still resists that pattern. Here, the land remains visible in its full authority. Weather still interrupts. Distance still matters. Seasons still impose themselves on ordinary life. The natural world has not disappeared behind convenience. That is why Alaska feels different from so much of the world beyond it. Not because people are absent, but because people remain visibly secondary to the landscape itself. Human life exists here, adapts here, works here, and endures here, yet it never fully overwhelms what surrounds it. The frontier has not vanished. It remains part of the everyday. There is also something older in Alaska, a reminder that not every place has been fully absorbed into speed, density, and control. Some landscapes still ask for patience. Some still demand humility. Some still resist being reduced to background. Alaska is one of those places. It matters, too, because it preserves a relationship that elsewhere has become increasingly rare. A relationship between land, water, animals, and human life that is still direct enough to be seen. The salmon still shape the rivers. The seasons still shape movement. The cold still shapes labor, shelter, and risk. In Alaska, the structure of life is still legible. For the people who live here, that reality is not an abstraction. It is daily life. It is the knowledge that weather can still change plans, that distance can still shape opportunity, and that survival often begins with respect rather than confidence. Alaska teaches not domination, but adjustment. Not mastery, but awareness. Not certainty, but attention. And in that sense, Alaska represents something larger than itself. It stands as a reminder that modern life can create the illusion of independence from nature, while places like this expose how incomplete that illusion really is. No road, no machine, no network fully cancels the power of geography. No plan removes the force of weather. No system makes human beings larger than the world they inhabit. That may be why Alaska continues to hold such power over the imagination. It is not merely beautiful, and it is not merely extreme. It is clarifying, It strips away the assumption that human control is complete. It reveals the older balance beneath modern life, the balance between ambition and limit, movement and exposure, presence and scale. Alaska also reminds us that wilderness is not important because it is empty of meaning. It is important because it contains meaning we have become less accustomed to seeing. Restraint, interdependence, fragility, endurance. The knowledge that life remains dependent on forces beyond human design. The knowledge that not everything has been settled. That is also why the changes unfolding here matter so deeply. When Alaska changes, it is not only a remote landscape that changes. A living frontier changes. A visible relationship between nature and civilization changes. One of the few remaining places that still shows the full weight of that relationship becomes harder to read in the same way. And yet Alaska endures. It endures in the shape of its mountains, in the force of its winters, in the migrations that still cross its rivers and coastlines, and in the communities that continue to live with the land rather than apart from it. Its lesson is not that humanity has no place here. Its lesson is that place itself still matters. That the world remains larger than comfort, speed, and convenience. That some frontiers are valuable precisely because they have not disappeared. To stand before Alaska is to be reminded of proportion, of how small we are beside deep time, severe weather, vast distance, and living systems older than our maps. It is a place that does not flatter human power. It measures it. And in doing so, it offers something rare, a clear view of our limits and of the world that still exists beyond them. Perhaps that is what Alaska ultimately represents. Not the past, not a fantasy of untouched land, but a living reminder that wilderness still has the power to shape reality, that nature can still remain central, that human life can still be measured against forces it did not create and cannot fully control, and that, even now, there are places where the frontier is not history. It is present tense. In the end, Alaska matters because it remains unfinished in the best and most profound sense of the word. Unfinished by total control. Unfinished by complete domestication. Unfinished by the illusion that every landscape must yield entirely to human design. It remains a place where life is still negotiated with weather, distance, season, and terrain. A place where humility is not philosophical. It is practical. And so Alaska remains what few places still are. A frontier not simply of land, but of perspective. A place that reminds us the modern world is not the whole world. A place where nature still sets the scale, still shapes the terms, still asks to be respected rather than assumed, and still stands, immense and unmoved, at the edge of human certainty. Alaska is not the last wild place on Earth, but it may be one of the last places in America where the wild still feels fully in command. And that is why it endures not only as a landscape, but as a reminder that there are still worlds larger than us, and that perhaps we need them to remain.